Wow.
I'm so proud of you for everything that you've done, and I can't wait to see what you guys do out there. Do you want to say something to them?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Listen,
all right.
I just spoke with the judges, okay? They've agreed to let us go last, all right? Yes! Remember what we talked about. See, what will be the last thing they see will be impressive, all right? Now listen, look, I know you guys are nervous. Believe me, I am too. But we're gonna take that nervous energy and we're gonna turn it into rocket fuel, all right?
Yeah.
You guys are with me? All right, let's blow them away. Here we go, comments on 3, all right? 1, 2, 3.
Welcome to the Double Dutch Citywide Championship. Who's ready for an awesome day? All right, we're getting started right now with the speed round. Here we go. So the speed scores will be added to the freestyle scores. So let's start the freestyle competition. First up is the Moon Jumpers. Next up is the Mustangs. Let's give it up for the Tigers. Here come the Skip-sations. For the Speed Angel.
Flashback, step into the scene. There's you, and there's a very different me. Touchdown, you have me, I believe. You have me, I believe you do. And where would I be?
Let's hear it for the Super Skippers.
Without you, I'd be picking my bag where I need to stay.
For the final team in our freestyle competition, let's hear it for the Comets! Judges' scores are in. And in third place this year, let's hear it for the Super Skippers! And in second place, it was was so close. Let's hear it for the Comets. And now our Double Dutch citywide champions for this year. Let's hear it for the Speed Angels.